In the months before his suicide in April 1945, Adolf Hitler was a physical wreck. As he faced military defeat, the 56-year-old Nazi leader looked an old man. This was the all-powerful Führer who had started a world war and planned to create a master race. But in reality, Hitler was a hypochondriac who for years had been hooked on an extraordinary cocktail of drugs.
Amphetamines to be alert and active during the day, and then barbiturates, bromine, iodine. So Hitler was taking uppers and downers.
There must have been an element of dependence, if not addiction.
The man who supplied Hitler with these drugs was a Dr. Theodor Morell.
He was, to a great part, a quack.
Hitler insisted he could not live without Morell. So what was the purpose of the drugs Morell was giving the Führer? What diseases were they designed to cure? And what effect did his illnesses and the drugs he was taking have on the mind and the decisions of the dictator? Dr. Theodor Morell became Hitler's personal physician in 1936. Over the years, he pumped more than 60 drugs into the Führer, some injected daily. It wasn't always clear what the potions contained, but many believed that their impact may have influenced the rise and fall of Adolf Hitler.
He was taking all kinds of medication at the time. He was a good pill popper long before that.
Morell's unconventional practices earned him a dubious nickname among the Nazi elite.
Hermann Göring, the Reichsmarschall, gave him the nickname Reichsspritzenmeister. Spritzenmeister, injection is the Spritze, the Reichsmaster of injections.
Some of Morell's treatments were quite bizarre.
He was also very aggressive with unusual treatments, and that appealed to Hitler. Morell had such things in his arsenal as feces of a Bulgarian peasant or chopped up bull's testicles. So he treated Hitler with a lot of very unconventional medications.
One of the things that he enjoyed immensely is having put leech on him. He really wanted leeches for treatment.
There was also some secret around the whole treatment with Dr. Morell. He was, to a great part, a quack.
Der Führer im Kreise seiner Mitarbeiter.
It was Morell, soon part of Hitler's inner circle and often seen in the background of newsreel film, who held the secrets to the state of Hitler's mind and body in the last decade of his life. The doctor and his wife were frequent visitors to Obersalzberg, Hitler's mountain retreat in southern Germany. But while he became a close confidant of Hitler, he was also loathed and envied for the power he appeared to wield over the Führer.
Well, I think he was very dependent. Morell traveled with him. Morell spent basically 24 hours with him, so he was totally dependent on Morell. And he liked Morell. Morell was almost like Rasputin, almost in a way, some kind of Rasputin.
Those two men were very deeply involved. They had become a functioning unit, depraved, but nevertheless a functioning unit. And I don't think couldn't have done without one another at that time.
Before joining Hitler, Morell had a flourishing and exclusive practice in Berlin's upmarket Kurfürstendamm. Even so, as personal physician to the Führer, he was not the obvious choice.
Why then did he pick Morell, who had the habits of a pig? He was dirty, he was fat, he was unkempt, and very much opposed to Hitler's habits. Hitler changed his silk shirt twice a day.
He also had the unpleasant habit of not wanting to bathe. And so people didn't like to be around Theodor Morell very much. He was uniformly disliked in Hitler's circles, but all except the man who really counted most, Adolf Hitler.
When Hitler first met Morell, he was at the height of his powers. This was how the Führer appeared to the German people in the 1930s. In reality, he was a hypochondriac, already suffering from a string of debilitating and sometimes embarrassing illnesses.
His major problem is probably with his gastrointestinal tract, with his stomach, with his bowels. He's flatulent, he's constipated, and apparently this causes a great deal of discomfort to him.
This condition hardly reflected Hitler's need to present himself as the leader of a master race. Obsessed with his image, he was paranoid about putting on weight and for years had been taking laxatives.
Became a laxative abuser. And mistaken idea that that would keep him from gaining weight. He was using them to kind of cheat nature, basically. Unsuccessfully, but that's what he was trying to do. Now this goes back to his first political campaigns in 1928 and onward. Laxative, I think, began this history in many ways.
Morell blamed Hitler's stomach problems in part on his vegetarian diet and prescribed him what were called Dr. Koestler's anti-gas pills for flatulence and something called Mutterflor, the preparation made from the feces of Bulgarian peasants to combat the effect of the laxatives. The problem for Hitler's stomach, though, was that Morell was also giving him painkillers to alleviate the painful stomach cramps, and these had quite the opposite effect of the laxatives, leaving Hitler's gut in a vicious cycle.
He was taking laxatives on one hand to clear his gut and taking painkillers on the other hand, which will cause his gut to seize up. So I think in a sense that I don't think his gut knew what to do next. It was a very unpleasant situation, I should imagine. I'm not surprised he had wind.
Despite Morell's unconventional methods, Hitler fell under his spell. But Hitler's stomach complaints were the least of the problems facing Morell. Nazi propaganda tried to maintain the myth of the invincible dictator. The truth was starkly different. Hitler was suffering from not one but several serious medical conditions that may have determined the outcome of the two most decisive battles of the Second World War.
Breslau, die 7. Sommerkampfspiele der Hitlerjugend. Gymnastikvorführungen der Mädel.
Adolf Hitler was obsessed with the functions of his own body, and central to the Nazi project was biology and medicine.
Vorführungen der Gruppe Turnen.
This was the Hitler Youth, the organization that would re-educate the young of Germany into the ideals of the National Socialist Party. It was designed to create a new kind of human being, the embodiment of health and racial purity.
In Anlehnung an den deutschen Arbeitsdienst wurde in Serbien der serbische Aufbaudienst eingeführt.
Nazi Germany was based on a biological racism. And initially he was talking about the physically defective, mentally defective, and that was really the first euthanasia program that comes out of this line of thinking, and then he goes on to the gas chambers and to the concentration camps.
But what if the Führer himself failed to live up to the Nazi ideal? What if his physical and mental performance proved inadequate? The answer to these questions might explain the curious choice of Dr. Theodor Morell as his personal physician. Morell could be trusted to keep secret the truth of Hitler's failing health and the lengths to which he was prepared to go to ensure Hitler had the energy and drive to lead Germany through the war. Berlin fell in 1945. Shortly after, a specialist who had treated Hitler a year earlier with cocaine for ear and sinus problems gave evidence to American interrogators. A report he'd written a year earlier described Hitler's attraction to certain medications. Not that Hitler was your common drug addict, he said, but his neuropathic constitution led to his finding certain drugs particularly pleasurable. Was this the secret that Morell had been keeping for nearly a decade? Had he turned Hitler into a drug addict?
He took a number of drugs that were addictive. He took them so frequently that there must have been an element of dependence, if not addiction. Of course, the opiates and the codeine were addictive. He also gave Hitler cocaine, which is also addictive. Sedatives for insomnia, stimulants for being more up to an occasion.
In 1936, the same year as the Nuremberg rally, a new drug came onto the scene, one that might have appealed to Hitler.
I think, as I look at the evidence, amphetamines became available in 1936 to the general public. And they received immense publicity. It was extolled as a miracle drug, a cure for fatigue. And I suspect that Hitler was always interested in medical problems and new things, and I suspect that he probably wanted to try them.
The evidence is that Hitler indeed found the new drug irresistible. In 1938, the King of Italy told his foreign minister that Hitler was being injected with narcotics and stimulants. There was further evidence in 1939 that Morell had routine access to stimulant drugs. Europe was on the brink of war when the German army marched triumphantly into the Sudetenland in western Czechoslovakia. The previous day, though, the Czech president, under threat of invasion, was subjected to a verbal tirade from Hitler and collapsed. Hitler called for Morell, who administered a mysterious injection. Immediately afterwards, it was said the Czech president became fresh and alert. Hitler joked that the injection had made him too lively. He was worried he would not sign the surrender document. So what was in these injections? There are clues in the diaries that Morell began to keep from 1941 onwards. These show that for years Morell was supplying Hitler with a concoction called Vitamultin, which he gave him both as pills and injections. But what did Vitamultin contain? Hitler's staff had vital evidence, especially his valet Heinz Linger.
It was a very surprising interview. Linger said, among other things, that every morning before Hitler got out of bed, he had an injection for Morell. So I asked him what happened. Linger said, oh, he got immediately alert, alive, fresh, ready for the day, while the needle was still in the arm. And so that alerted me, because there's just nothing else that would have that kind of effect. It had to be a stimulant drug of the amphetamine class.
Other members of Hitler's staff support the valet's description of the impact of the injection and Hitler's responses.
One of his secretaries described this vividly, that he would look like a defeated man, and then he'd get an injection, and then all at once he was his old self again and in command of the situation. Expressed profuse gratitude to Morell for Morell, you're a savior. Morell, you saved me again. Morell, I don't know how I got through the night, but here you are, and you've cured me.
Morell was secretive about what precisely was in the Vitamultin, admitting only to a variety of vitamins. In tablet form, Morell delivered the preparation to Hitler in gold-wrapped packages. In 1943, Professor Ernst Gunther Schenk, a nutrition expert for the SS, managed to secretly obtain some of the mysterious gold-wrapped pills and sent them away for analysis.
Hitler's special preparation was sent to a chemist for analysis, and it contained the vitamins as specified and pervitin, which is the German trade name for methamphetamine. Complete surprise to Schenk. He didn't suspect anything like that.
When Schenk reported the results of the analysis to his superiors, he was ordered to forget the subject altogether. But Schenk's findings made more sense than Morell's insistence that the mysterious pills only contained vitamins. There is confirmation that Morell was also giving Hitler Vitamaltin by injection in one of the early entries in his diaries. On the 7th of August 1941, he wrote, "Injected Vitamaltin calcium and glyconorm, bent the needle on insertion." Over the following years, this type of entry was repeated time and again.
Almost daily gave him preparation for Hitler. Always when Hitler said, "I am to fatigue," or he a bad mood, this was the same. Morell gave him golden Vitamaltin.
Outside Stalingrad, the icy winter becomes a fiery hell.
If Hitler was taking amphetamines, it's likely his dependency almost certainly affected his judgment. The disastrous battle for Stalingrad in the winter of 1942 and 43 shows how Hitler's amphetamine abuse may have influenced the course of the war. The defeat at Stalingrad marked a decisive turning point. The Eastern Front had always been critical to Germany's military ambitions. At first, Hitler and his generals thought the city could be taken within days. Instead, the battle descended first into hand-to-hand fighting and then into a long and brutal siege.
At the time the Stalingrad disaster was taking shape, Hitler was, I think, in a hypomanic state. He would, any flimsy excuse that would keep the army advancing and not permitting retreat, he seized upon it. Optimism prevails. It's a time of exalted feeling, exalted power. It's the sort of thing that amphetamine produces. This kind of optimism produces errant judgment. Hitler's behavior, and it really was quite consistent with an amphetamine intoxication.
And on February the 2nd, 1943, after 162 days of the heaviest fighting in the history of warfare, Stalingrad is free. The Nazis had capitulated.
And Hitler certainly misjudged the Stalingrad campaign, which was marked by a disastrous combination of indecision and stubborn inflexibility.
These are the men who had been promised that as conquerors they would winter in Stalingrad.
At first, Hitler was hopelessly optimistic. Then, as the position of the German forces deteriorated, absurdly single-minded, refusing to entertain any thoughts of retreat. The Stalingrad offensive began on the 21st of November 1942. On the 23rd, Morell noted in his diary that Hitler was getting very little sleep and gave him what he called the usual injections.
When the reverses kick in, it must have been stressful for him too. And I suspect that as things go from bad to worse, the stress is built up on him and he becomes more dependent both on Morell and his pharmacopoeia.
The strains of the defeat at Stalingrad, which for the first time brought criticism from his generals, took their toll on Hitler's health, and especially his heart. In fact, Morell had given Hitler an electrocardiogram test over a year earlier. The diagnosis was coronary sclerosis. But it wasn't until the 17th of December 1942 that Morel discussed with Hitler this potentially dangerous condition. He noted in his diary, "Führer wants to be told whether his conditions would be very bad because he would have to make important decisions regarding Germany. He does not fear death. It would be a relief for him. He only lives for the fatherland." For a period after Stalingrad, it appears from Morel's diary that he withdrew the Vitamaltin. But it wasn't long before he'd reintroduced his magic remedy. By 1944, he was using a more mysterious version of the Vitamaltin calcium. On the 14th of March 1944, while at Obersalzberg, Morel injected Hitler with a different form of the drug. He wrote in his diary that he gave patient A, as he called him, a shot of Vitamaltin Forte for the first time, adding that he came to life at once. There's one final piece of evidence to suggest that Morel's tablets contained amphetamines.
Amphetamine is a drug that induces tolerance, that is, it takes additional drug to produce the same effect. And Morel himself said that he had to increase the volume, 2 cc's, 4 cc's, and so on. And he was talking about Vitamaltin. You don't develop tolerance to vitamins, but vitamin injections, but you do amphetamine. Many other observers said, too, that Hitler had to have increasingly more drug to get the same effect. And of those drugs capable of producing addiction in those days, why it would be amphetamine. By far most likely.
By the end of 1944, Hitler was living with another symptom that has puzzled medical investigators. For at least 3 years, Hitler had suffered from tremors in his hands and legs. What could have been the cause? And was it a sign of a deterioration in his mental powers?